Competency 6 listens actively. I think this one is one of my favorites because it's the one that a lot of people struggle with. First of all, because listening is such a challenge. Also, because we often hear people confusing this competency with active listening, which is different than listens actively. So we'll talk about those differences today. First, I just want to say that from an ICF perspective, listening actively is the ability to hear and receive what the client is saying. And that means that we have to let go of our interpretations of what the client is saying and really listen with an open heart and open mind. And to do that, we have to self-manage once again. So self-management is the common thread between all these competencies because we are the tool in the conversation, if you will. The coach is there to listen, to evoke awareness for the coachee. So listening is actually where the doors to change open, where the coach has a real opportunity to create shifts in someone else, just in what they're listening for and witnessing back to the client. So the shifts in language, in intonations again, in patterns of speaking, or like even choice of words, you're listening for all of that, plus what's not being said. You're also listening to the energy of the client, the body language, the facial expressions, the eye movement. So key when you're coaching to pay attention to eye movement. It really shows you when a client's deep in thought, when they're confused, or when they're connected, and when they're disconnected. So eyes are so important when you're listening from that global perspective. And the challenge with this competency is always around creating or adding our own meaning to what the client is saying. So this is all about showing up from an empathetic position that is truly in service to someone else. So again, very subtle changes with this competency. There are two in particular, the sub-competencies, where the shift is from the past to present, or from the emerging to what is, which sounds a little bit confusing perhaps, but essentially what we're doing is the real change is when the coach reflects what the client communicated was changed to when the client is communicating, not communicated. So past tense is communicated. Is communicating is the actual change in what you read in the competency. But to bring that to life, what we want to understand is the opportunity for synchronicity in what is emerging in the moment for the client. So the shift was all about bringing a present tense and a present focus to being with your client, as opposed to listening for what was said or what will be said or what you are making of what's being said. So in practice, the coach is allowing the client to finish their sentences. The coach is not interrupting, unless, of course, the paradox is interrupting for a coaching purpose. And what we mean by that is if a client is circling, if a client is, you can see them going into this funnel of bad emotion or negative emotion, or if the client has gone on tangents and has really lost the focus for the session, that's when you want to interrupt for a coaching purpose. But otherwise, you are allowing your client to complete their thoughts and to allow space between what the client has said and your question. And of course, this can become challenging when we think about time or what we feel like we need to bring value as a client. Like, how do we contribute value to this client, or what is your value proposition as a coach? These things interfere with our ability to stay present and to stay mindful and to truly be in that listens actively stance. So when a coach is doing this well, they are asking good questions, making observations. They're allowing time for silence and pause. They are willing to sit in the energy that the client is bringing. They're willing to explore emotion with the client and to linger and meet the client where they are. And that is truly the essence of listens actively. New coaches will typically jump on evidence, as we call it, or on language that is emerging for the client because they want to um, take advantage of a single moment in the conversation rather than allowing the entire context to emerge. So when we hear a word like fear, or we hear expression like I'm frustrated, a coach may have the urge to want to explore that when it actually comes into conversation without giving it its full opportunity to emerge for the client. And what does that mean for the client? What's the story they're telling themselves? And what's the greater context of this for the client? So it's restraining ourselves and allowing the full development of a client's thoughts to emerge into the conversation before we narrow in on certain aspects of the conversation. And it's also when we forget that clients live in systems. One of the things that we talk about a lot at Coach Academy is how the context of the client has to be acknowledged and respected to be able to help a client bring change into their lives. And so that means that we understand that the client has relationships out of this conversation, and there are influences on this client that we don't have control of and the client doesn't have control of. And so we just want to be aware of all the systems that the client lives within, including culture, family, community, work, and how does what we are, bringing to life in this conversation apply to, or how does it affect the system of the client? Well, for listens actively, like I said at the beginning, what I find fascinating about this competency is the nuance and the change between active listening and listens actively. So when we think about active listening, it's often a competency that we use in leadership circles for leadership training, and it begins with understanding each other. And as coaches, we do not need to understand the client. What we want is for the client to understand themselves better. And so active listening is about wanting to understand, which means paraphrasing is one strategy for active listening. And paraphrasing is not something that we encourage in coaching because we don't want to interpret our clients. We don't want to add our interpretation or opinion or lens to what the client is sharing. What we want is for the client to hear themselves through the coach better. That means mirroring instead of paraphrasing or interpretation. It means echoing back. It means using clean language. And it really means using clients' metaphors, not our own metaphors, to allow the client to explore their own thinking and their own beliefs and their own challenges in that moment. So we're using the self as a tool to evoke awareness in a way that is truly meant to stay objective. And that would be probably the biggest shift from an active listening stance.